Hi, Art Seekers. We're here with the phenomenally talented FinDAC. Really, I've been a fan of yours for ages, and it's such an honor to get to talk to
No
you.
worries. I don't like being introduced like that, but anyway.
So, how did you start to see the street as your canvas?
um, well, I went through a really bad breakup years ago, which involved lawyers and legal cases and loads of hurt and pain and shit. And I just needed something to take my mind off it. And at the time in London, I was working in digital advertising, and I was surrounded by creative people, but also on the streets, I was surrounded by street art. And I liked the energy of it, but actually a lot of it I thought I could do better myself. So I just set myself a task foolishly, thinking I could do better. And I wouldn't say that I did do better, but I did it well enough to give me an impetus to carry on doing it. And then over time, I just improved, hopefully.
What was the first piece that you ever did?
The first piece I painted on the street was actually it was an event around a Banksy print release at Pictures on Walls in London. They knew it was going to be packed. They knew there was going to be a queue of thousands of people trying to get a print. And so they organized this whole event where people would be painting all the way along the street. So essentially, I went there and I painted a toilet block because they had these portaloos, we call them, these kind of like plastic
Porta potties?
yeah, porta potties. So they had a whole line of them along the road for people who were queuing up, and I basically just painted like the backs of 4 of them or something. Yeah, it was weird. So my first experience of street was painting a toilet. So the reason I do what I'm doing now is as a direct is the antithesis of what I was doing then. So then I was doing very Sin City style stuff, hot chicks with tattoos and guns and just like typical male viewpoint, with blood splashes and like splashes of paint around them, etc., etc. But I got to a point like about a year and a half into my career that I just thought that was too easy, because you know when you look at like the men's magazines and even like TV shows and movies, it's all about objectification and sexualization, and I just thought, well, anybody can do this.
I think it's really interesting and nuanced that you recognize that even though you painted women,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was in the Sin City aesthetic and now it's shifted, and so
Yeah,
the gaze has shifted from the male to maybe a more
I
neutral.
hope so.
So,
That
how
that
do you see that registering in the aesthetic itself?
well, that was the intention right from the word go, was to. I mean, it's a weird thing actually, because even when I was painting the Sin City characters, because they're badass sort of characters, they appeal as much to women as they do to men. But when you start painting softer stuff, you are kind of in a gray area as to who they're going to appeal to, because certainly for the majority of men, I would say this is like 95%, maybe even more, they want to look at sexy women. It's a sad fact, but it's true. And certainly for me, when I started painting the Asian girls with the masks, it was always the sexier ones that sold better or got more attention, because it's just the way that we're built, you know. Men want to look at sexy women whether we like it or not. But I didn't want to feed into that, and I didn't want to carry on painting sexy women in the new style, because that wasn't the point of it.
That's interesting to me too, because I think we have this idea that if you exploit or show or celebrate a woman's
Mm-hmm.
sexuality, that is geared toward the 95% of men
Yeah,
that you're talking about, but that could also be a really empowered choice for the woman, and
absolutely.
sexuality isn't anti-feminist.
Correct. And I think that the danger in that is that anybody who is displaying themselves in that particular way is always walking a fine line between being a whore or being someone who's strong and has decided to be that person. The journey of my work, I think, has been to go the opposite way and to go back to more sort of traditional values, which of obviously being lost in every continent in the world, in every country. All those traditional elements, the clothing, the hairstyles, the jewelry, even just the way the women carried themselves, that's all being lost because we're all westernized now, and we're becoming homogenized. We're just all like sort of traveling down an ever decreasing like tunnel to a pinpoint of all looking the same and acting the same. There's also another interesting side of that, because I paint Asian women. I've painted them a lot. I've always tried not to sexualize them, always tried not to objectify them, but I think the majority of people think that I have Asian fever. they all assume that I'm interested. Well, I think actually the assumption is that I sleep with all the girls that I paint, which is not the case.
What is it about those cultures, the Eastern cultures, that are so influential to you?
Initially, the reason I chose Asians was because in the West, we don't understand Asian cultures. We have some very, very strange ideas about Asian women that actually is tied in with the whole Asian fever thing, like the Western guy going to Asia to get a bride or whatever. Like this, that's a weird, weird thing. And so, you know, you have misconceptions about geisha, about the fact that they're prostitutes, etc., and that they're there to please men. Not the case at all. They're entertainers. They're artisans. But of course, those misconceptions have continued down through the years and possibly even gotten worse. The way I looked at it at the time was that it was the Asian cultures that were the main recipient of that sort of demeaning attitude. And so that tied in with the fact that I wanted to paint strong, empowered women, but not do them in a sexual way. Because the worst thing that I could do to paint Asian women is to then paint them sexually, because that totally undermines everything that I was doing in the approach. I want them to be beautiful, I want them to be sensual, but that's not sex. Sex is about selling. And I'm not trying to sell my work based on the girl's sexuality. I'm basically trying to depict them in an honorable way, both for them and for me.